Imagine that every decision you have ever made still exists, not as a memory, not as a possibility, but as a living reality, somewhere, right now. A version of you accepted the job you declined. Another never left home. Another spoke the words you swallowed. Another stayed with the person you lost. Another walked away before the damage began. If every choice already exists, then what exactly is this life? And why does this particular version feel so painfully real? For centuries, philosophers imagined reality as a single road stretching from birth toward death, a line with one beginning, one present, and one future. Every decision split the road into before and after. Every consequence erased countless alternatives. To live was to sacrifice every life you did not choose. It is a comforting picture because it is simple, but nature has a habit of dismantling simple stories. At the smallest scales we have ever observed, certainty begins to dissolve. Electrons refuse to behave like tiny marbles rolling across invisible tables. Instead, they spread through probability like ripples across an unseen ocean. Until measured, they are described not by one location, but by many possible states at once. The equations of quantum mechanics do not tell us where something is. They describe every place it could be. For nearly a century, physicists have argued over what this actually means. Does reality remain uncertain until observation, or does every possibility become real? Among the many attempts to answer that question, one idea has remained both elegant and deeply unsettling: the many worlds interpretation. First proposed in 1957 by physicist Hugh Everett III, the idea rejects the notion that quantum possibilities magically collapse into one outcome. Instead, it suggests something far stranger. Nothing disappears. Every possible outcome continues. Reality simply branches. When one quantum event could produce multiple results, the universe does not choose between them. It becomes all of them. Not one future, every future. If this interpretation is correct, the universe is unimaginably larger than we normally imagine. Not because space extends forever, but because reality itself continuously multiplies. Every second, every interaction, every microscopic uncertainty becomes another branching of existence. Your life would not resemble a straight line. It would resemble an infinite tree whose branches divide faster than any mind could ever count. Every heartbeat, every blink, every word, every decision, not creating possibilities, but revealing paths that were always capable of existing. At first, this sounds like science fiction, yet remarkably, the mathematics behind quantum mechanics functions perfectly well without ever demanding that only one outcome survives. The equations themselves remain indifferent. They describe evolution, not selection. The act of selecting only one reality is something physicists have traditionally added afterward to match experience. Everett asked an almost dangerous question. What if that extra step was never necessary? What if the universe never deletes information at all? It is an astonishingly economical idea. Nothing mystical, nothing supernatural. Only mathematics allowed to continue without interruption. Many physicists remain skeptical. Others consider it one of the cleanest explanations available. No laboratory has yet confirmed that parallel branches physically exist, nor has any experiment definitively ruled them out. The debate continues, and perhaps that uncertainty is appropriate, because the implications are not merely scientific, they are existential. If every possible version of reality continues somewhere beyond your own experience, then identity becomes far less stable than we usually assume. Who are you? Is it the person reading these words? Or the countless versions who made different decisions before this very moment? Imagine standing before two identical doors. Behind one is a familiar life. Behind the other is complete uncertainty. You hesitate. Eventually, you choose. In ordinary thinking, one future survives while the other disappears forever. But in Everett's picture, something profoundly different occurs. One version of you walks left, another walks right. Neither is more real. Neither is imaginary. From the inside, each believes they made the only possible choice. Each remembers the same childhood, the same parents, the same victories, the same failures, until that instant. Then history quietly divides. The split would be invisible. Neither version would feel anything unusual. No flash of light, no cosmic vibration, no awareness of duplication. Each simply continues living, completely convinced that reality remained singular. Perhaps this is why the idea feels so unsettling. It offers no dramatic evidence, no portals, no mysterious visitors, only ordinary life continuing exactly as expected. If branching occurs, it hides itself perfectly. Every observer remains trapped inside only one thread of an infinitely expanding tapestry. From your perspective, nothing extraordinary ever happens. Yet beneath appearances, reality may have become vastly more complicated. This leads to a question that philosophers have wrestled with long before quantum mechanics ever existed. What gives one life its uniqueness? Suppose every possible version of your future already unfolds somewhere beyond your awareness. Would your choices still matter? Or would decision itself become an illusion? It is tempting to conclude that nothing matters if every possibility exists. After all, if another version succeeds whenever you fail, then failure loses meaning. If another version loves where you are rejected, then heartbreak becomes temporary. If another version survives where you perish, then death itself begins to look strangely local. But this conclusion may misunderstand what experience actually is. Imagine a library containing every book that could ever be written, every language, every story, every ending. Does the existence of every book diminish the importance of reading one? Or does meaning arise precisely because consciousness can only turn one page at a time? Perhaps existence works similarly. Reality may contain unimaginable abundance, yet awareness experiences only a single unfolding sequence. You never feel infinite lives simultaneously. You feel this one, this conversation, this breath, this moment. Whatever else may exist beyond perception remains inaccessible, not because it lacks reality, but because consciousness appears to travel along only one continuous path, and that path becomes your universe. Perhaps the deepest mystery is not whether countless realities exist. Perhaps the greater mystery is why awareness occupies this branch instead of another. Why these memories, Why this body? Why this timeline? Why this life? Science has not answered that question. Neither has philosophy, nor religion. Yet each tradition, in its own language, returns to the same astonishing observation. The universe is filled with possibilities far exceeding what any single observer can ever witness. Maybe the greatest illusion is believing reality owes us completeness. Perhaps consciousness was never designed to see the whole tree, only the branch beneath its feet. But if every branch truly exists, then somewhere beyond everything you currently call your life, another version of you is asking exactly the same question, believing just as confidently that their world is the only one that ever was. And that possibility forces us toward an even stranger realization. If reality is not choosing between futures, then perhaps time itself is not choosing between moments either. If every choice already exists, then the universe may not be creating the future at all. It may simply be revealing where your awareness happens to be. That distinction seems almost insignificant at first, yet it quietly overturns one of the oldest assumptions in human history. We instinctively imagine time as movement. The past lies behind us. The future waits ahead. The present travels forward like a spotlight, sweeping across an unfinished landscape. Every clock reinforces this intuition. Every sunrise appears to confirm it. Every memory tells us that life unfolds in one direction, leaving yesterday forever inaccessible. But modern physics has repeatedly challenged the idea that the universe experiences time the way we do. According to Einstein's theory of relativity, there is no single universal now. Two observers moving differently through space can disagree about which events happen first, and neither is objectively wrong. Time stretches. Time contracts. Simultaneity depends on perspective. This is not philosophy. It is one of the most experimentally verified discoveries ever made. Atomic clocks flown aboard. Aircraft tick differently from those left on Earth. Satellites orbiting our planet must constantly correct for relativistic effects, or GPS systems would drift by kilometers every day. The universe already behaves in ways our intuition never evolved to understand. If the present is not universal, then perhaps it is not fundamental either. Some physicists describe reality using an idea known as the block universe. Imagine the universe not as a movie playing frame by frame, but as an entire film reel existing at once. Every frame is present, the beginning, the ending, every conversation, every heartbeat, every decision. Nothing is being added. Nothing is disappearing. The sensation of time flowing may belong not to the universe itself, but to consciousness moving through an already existing structure. It is an unsettling thought. You feel as though tomorrow has not happened. Yet, in the geometry of space-time, tomorrow may already occupy its own location, just as yesterday still does. The future is not waiting to be built, it is waiting to be encountered. Now imagine placing Everett's branching universe inside Einstein's block universe. The picture becomes almost impossible to visualize. Not one four-dimensional block, but countless blocks. Every possible history, every possible future, every branch complete in itself, every version internally consistent. an endless architecture of realities, each containing observers convinced they inhabit the only genuine world. If such a structure exists, then reality resembles less a tree growing upward and more an infinite library whose shelves were never empty to begin with. Every volume already exists. Consciousness simply opens one page after another. This raises a question that is rarely discussed outside philosophy of physics. If every branch already exists, what exactly changes when you make a choice? At first glance, the answer appears to be nothing. The universe contains every outcome regardless. But notice something subtle. Although every branch may exist, your experience does not divide into all of them simultaneously. You continue through one sequence of events. From the inside, the decision still matters absolutely. Imagine standing before a mountain range. Every trail already exists. Some climb towards sunlight. Others descend into fog. One disappears into dense forest. The landscape does not rearrange itself because you begin walking. The paths were always there, yet the journey you experience depends entirely on the trail beneath your feet. This distinction preserves something many people fear is lost: meaning. Even if countless alternatives exist, awareness remains profoundly local. You cannot borrow the happiness of another version of yourself. You cannot inherit the wisdom earned by a life you never lived. You cannot feel the love, grief, triumph, or regret experienced by another branch. Their existence changes the architecture of reality. It does not replace your experience. Perhaps this explains why responsibility survives even in a universe overflowing with possibilities. Every decision still shapes the only narrative your consciousness directly inhabits. That realization leads us toward another mystery. How does consciousness know which branch to follow? Or perhaps more accurately, does it choose at all? Neuroscience complicates the question even further. Long before you become consciously aware of making certain decisions, measurable activity has already begun inside the brain. Experiments performed over several decades suggest that neural processes can predict simple choices fractions of a second before participants report deciding. The implication sparked enormous controversy. If the brain initiates decisions before conscious awareness notices them, then what role does consciousness actually play? Some interpreted these findings as evidence that free will is an illusion. Others argued the experiments measure only trivial actions, pressing buttons, moving fingers, not the complex decisions that define human lives. The debate remains unresolved, but when placed beside Everett's branching worlds, an entirely different possibility emerges. Perhaps consciousness is not generating reality. Perhaps it is aligning with one unfolding trajectory among many physically permitted ones. This idea is speculative. There is no accepted scientific theory demonstrating that awareness selects quantum branches. Most physicists would caution against making such claims. Yet even without crossing that line, the question itself becomes fascinating. What is consciousness actually doing? We often imagine awareness as the author of experience, but perhaps it is also its witness, or its navigator, or something stranger still. Notice how rarely you become aware of your own awareness. Most of the time, you are absorbed by thoughts, conversations, memories, plans. Consciousness itself remains invisible because it is the medium through which everything else appears. It is like trying to see the window while looking through it. Only occasionally, during meditation, profound silence, moments of danger, or overwhelming beauty, does awareness seem to notice itself. Those moments feel unusually vivid. Time slows, details sharpen. Ordinary experience acquires extraordinary clarity. Many cultures interpreted such experiences as glimpses into a deeper reality. Modern neuroscience often explains them through changes in attention, perception, and brain networks. Both descriptions may illuminate different aspects of the same phenomenon. Whatever consciousness ultimately proves to be, it remains one of science's greatest unsolved mysteries. No equation fully explains why subjective experience exists, why electrical activity inside billions of neurons should produce the feeling of seeing color, or hearing music, or loving another person, or fearing death. Physics describes matter, neuroscience describes mechanisms. But the inner light of experience itself remains astonishingly difficult to explain. This mystery becomes even more profound if reality contains countless versions of you. Does each branch possess its own conscious observer? Or is consciousness something more fundamental, appearing wherever sufficiently complex systems arise? No one knows. Yet these questions reveal something unexpected. The deeper science investigates reality, the more it encounters mysteries that resemble ancient philosophical puzzles. Identity, choice, time, awareness, existence. Concepts once belonging almost exclusively to philosophers now occupy the frontiers of theoretical physics. Perhaps that is not a coincidence. Perhaps the universe has always been inviting the same questions. Only our vocabulary has changed. But before we become too enchanted by infinite possibilities, we must confront a quieter and more uncomfortable implication. If every choice already exists, then somewhere every mistake exists too. Every betrayal, every act of courage never taken, every apology never spoken, every dream abandoned, not erased, not forgotten, simply lived by another version of yourself. And if those lives are as real as this one, what then becomes of regret? Regret has a peculiar relationship with time. It is born in the present, but it survives by rewriting the past. A conversation replays in your mind, each repetition offering a better sentence than the one you actually spoke. A door closes, yet imagination insists it could still be opened. Years pass, but a single decision continues to cast a shadow over everything that followed. We often describe regret as wishing we had chosen differently. But beneath that wish lies something even deeper. The belief that another version of life would have been better. Long before quantum mechanics suggested branching realities, human beings were already haunted by invisible lives. The career never pursued, the city never visited, the family never created, the friendship allowed to fade. We carry these unrealized futures as though they are ghosts walking beside us. Perhaps that is why the idea of parallel realities feels strangely familiar. It gives physical language to an emotional experience we have always known. Every life contains echoes of lives unlived, but there is a crucial difference between imagination and existence. When you imagine another future, you remain aware that it is hypothetical. When the many worlds interpretation is taken literally, those alternatives are not fantasies. They are histories, complete, consistent, as real to their inhabitants as this reality is to you. That possibility changes the nature of regret in an unexpected way. Suppose somewhere another version of you accepted the opportunity you declined. They became successful in ways you never did. They built the life you secretly hoped for. Would knowing they exist make your disappointment disappear, or would it deepen it? At first, the answer seems obvious. If another version achieved your dreams, then perhaps nothing has truly been lost. Somewhere, success happened. But notice who experienced it, not you. Not the awareness reading these words. Another observer with the same childhood, the same memories up to a certain point, but a different unfolding story. Their happiness cannot travel across branches. Their accomplishments cannot become yours. Their victories remain forever inaccessible. In that sense, infinite realities do not eliminate loss, they redefine it. Loss becomes separation rather than destruction. Every possibility survives, but consciousness experiences only one path. Imagine standing before an enormous stained glass window. Each colored panel represents a different version of your life. From a distance, the entire window forms one magnificent design. Yet your eye can focus on only one fragment at a time. Beauty exists everywhere. Experience does not. Perhaps this explains why grief remains meaningful, even in a universe filled with alternatives. When someone dies, it is tempting to imagine another branch where they lived, another world where the illness never appeared, another history where the accident never occurred. Such thoughts can be comforting, but they also reveal something profound. Our sorrow is not merely about existence, it is about relationship. We mourn the loss of this shared story, this conversation, this sequence of moments that can never continue in exactly the same way. Even if infinite versions endure elsewhere, this connection ends here, and that ending still matters. The same is true of joy, a birthday celebration, a quiet walk at sunset, a child laughing for the first time. None of these moments become less precious because countless alternatives may exist. If anything, their uniqueness becomes even more striking. Not because they happen only once in the universe, but because they happen only once in your experience. There is another reason regret refuses to disappear. Human beings rarely regret outcomes alone. We regret becoming someone. A decision changes more than circumstances. It changes character. Consider two people who begin with identical lives. One forgives after a betrayal. The other chooses revenge. Years later, they no longer differ merely in biography. Their habits have changed. Their relationships have changed. Their understanding of themselves has changed. Each decision subtly reshapes the person making the next one. Life is not simply a collection of isolated choices. It is a continuous process of becoming. This insight appears across cultures and centuries. Ancient Greek philosophers argued that repeated actions formed virtue or vice. Buddhist traditions describe the mind as continuously shaped by intention and habit. Modern neuroscience speaks of neuroplasticity, the brain's remarkable ability to reorganize itself through repeated experience. Different languages, different eras, a surprisingly similar observation. Choices leave traces, not only in the world. Within the chooser, this may be the most overlooked aspect of branching realities. The universe is not merely generating different futures, it is generating different people. At every divergence, identity itself begins to evolve. The version of you who faced hardship may become compassionate in ways another never could. The version who achieved effortless success may remain confident, but perhaps less empathetic. Neither is objectively superior. Each develops through experiences unavailable to the other. Identity is not frozen at the moment of branching. It continues unfolding. Like rivers separating from a common source, each branch carves its own landscape. Over time, they become almost unrecognizable. This realization transforms a familiar question. People often ask, what if I had made a different decision? Perhaps the deeper question is, who would I have become? The answer may matter far more than whether life became easier or harder. History is filled with individuals whose greatest achievements emerged from events they once wished had never happened. Scientific discoveries born from failure, works of art born from heartbreak, movements for justice born from unimaginable suffering. None of this suggests pain is desirable. It is not, nor does it romanticize tragedy. Instead, it reveals something subtler. Human beings possess an extraordinary capacity to transform experience into meaning. A difficult path can become a meaningful one, not because suffering is inherently valuable, but because consciousness interprets, adapts, and grows. This is where many discussions of parallel realities quietly lose sight of what makes life human. They become obsessed with outcomes. Which version became wealthier? Which version lived longer? Which version found love? Yet from inside a lived experience, meaning rarely depends on perfection. It depends on participation. You cannot outsource your courage to another branch. You cannot inherit another life's wisdom without living through the events that created it. Experience cannot be downloaded. It must be inhabited. Perhaps that is why regret, although painful, serves an important purpose. It reminds us that awareness is finite, attention is precious, precisely because it cannot occupy every possibility at once. To choose is to commit. To commit is to become. To become is to leave countless alternatives behind, not necessarily because they cease to exist, but because they cease to be yours. Yet even this perspective leaves one mystery unresolved. If every version of reality continues somewhere, why do we occasionally feel as though another life is somehow brushing against our own? Moments of déjà vu, unexplained familiarity, the uncanny certainty that we have stood in this exact place before, a dream that later seems to unfold in waking life. Most neuroscientists explain these experiences through entirely natural mechanisms. Subtle timing errors in memory processing, pattern recognition, expectation, and perception. These explanations are well supported and account for the vast majority of reported cases. But throughout history, such moments have inspired far more expansive interpretations. Many cultures viewed them as glimpses beyond ordinary perception, tiny cracks in the surface of reality, not proof, not evidence, but invitations to wonder. Whether those experiences reveal anything about the structure of the universe remains unknown, yet they expose something undeniably real about the human mind. We are creatures who instinctively search for hidden connections. We long to believe that our lives belong to something larger than isolated moments. And perhaps that longing itself is worth investigating, because before we can ask whether every choice already exists, we must confront an even more fundamental question. What kind of universe would be capable of containing them all? To imagine every possible choice existing at once is to imagine a universe beyond ordinary scale, not merely larger than galaxies, larger than space itself, because space, immense as it is, still suggests distance. A star can be unimaginably far away, yet in principle it can be reached by traveling long enough. The kind of reality implied by branching universes is different. Its separation is not measured in kilometers or light years. It is measured in possibility. Two versions of Earth could occupy the same underlying mathematical framework without ever sharing a single photon. They would not be hidden behind distant galaxies. They would be hidden behind different histories. This is one reason parallel realities, if they exist, would remain so difficult to detect. They are not necessarily elsewhere. They are otherwise. That distinction matters. Our brains evolved to navigate physical distance. We understand near and far, left and right, above and below. But possibility is not a direction. It has no compass. You cannot point toward an unrealized decision. You cannot build a telescope that looks into a different outcome. Every instrument humanity has ever constructed operates within the branch we already occupy. Science, by its nature, investigates observable reality. That is both its greatest strength and its greatest limitation. If something leaves measurable evidence, science can eventually examine it. If something produces no observable interaction whatsoever, the question becomes extraordinarily difficult. This is why physicists continue to debate interpretations of quantum mechanics rather than declaring one final answer. Many competing interpretations predict exactly the same experimental results. They differ not in mathematics, but in what that mathematics is believed to describe. Some propose branching universes. Others invoke hidden variables. Still others suggest entirely different frameworks. The equations remain astonishingly successful. The interpretation remains open. This uncertainty is not a weakness of science. It is evidence of intellectual honesty. The frontier of knowledge is rarely marked by certainty. It is marked by carefully defined questions. And perhaps no question is more profound than this. Why does reality possess mathematical order at all? Long before anyone imagined multiple universes, philosophers wondered why the cosmos appears comprehensible. Why should elegant equations describe falling apples, orbiting planets, electromagnetic waves, and quantum particles. Why should mathematics, a language invented within human minds, so precisely mirror structures existing billions of light years away? The physicist Eugene Wigner famously described this as the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics. Unreasonable because there is no obvious reason reality should be so deeply mathematical. Yet again and again, abstract equations predict phenomena long before anyone observes them. Entire particles have been discovered because mathematics suggested they must exist. Black holes emerged from equations decades before telescopes revealed their shadows. Gravitational waves were predicted a century before detectors finally measured the faint stretching of space-time itself. Reality often seems to obey principles that are discovered rather than invented. If every possible choice already exists, perhaps mathematics is not merely describing reality. Perhaps it is revealing its architecture. Imagine an architect's blueprint. Every room exists within the design before anyone walks through the building. Hallways connect spaces that have not yet been visited. The structure is complete even while the occupants experience it sequentially. Likewise, perhaps the universe possesses an underlying architecture far richer than our lived experience. Not a script dictating every moment, nor a machine stripping away freedom, but a landscape of possibilities governed by deep mathematical consistency. Within that landscape, conscious beings experience one coherent path at a time. This idea resonates unexpectedly with another principle emerging across modern science. Complexity often arises from remarkably simple rules. Consider snowflakes. Each appears uniquely intricate, yet every crystal grows according to the same physical laws. Tiny differences in temperature, humidity, and molecular interactions produce extraordinary diversity. The richness does not require infinitely complicated instructions. Simple rules generate endless variation. The same is true of coastlines, clouds, galaxies, and even living organisms. Patterns repeat across scales. Order and unpredictability coexist. A forest contains no two identical trees, yet every tree obeys the same biological principles. Perhaps human lives operate similarly. The laws remain constant. The outcomes multiply. Every choice becomes another expression of the same underlying framework. This perspective transforms how we think about chance. We often describe life as a series of accidents: a delayed train, an unexpected meeting, a random illness, a fortunate coincidence. From inside experience, events feel unpredictable because we cannot calculate every variable influencing them. But unpredictability does not necessarily imply absence of order. Weather appears chaotic despite obeying physical laws. The movement of a single leaf cannot easily be predicted, even though gravity remains perfectly consistent. Likewise, human history may appear wildly uncertain while still unfolding within an astonishingly structured universe. Here another question quietly emerges. If reality contains every possible path permitted by its laws, are there limits to possibility itself? The answer is almost certainly yes. Not everything that can be imagined can exist. A universe where 2 + 2 = 5 does not become possible simply because someone wishes it. Physical laws impose boundaries. Possibility is vast. It is not infinite in every direction. This distinction is important because it reminds us that imagination and reality are not identical. Fantasy has no constraints. Nature does. The remarkable thing is not that anything can happen. It is that so much can happen within a surprisingly elegant framework. Perhaps freedom itself depends upon those boundaries. A musician creates infinitely varied melodies using only a limited number of notes. A writer composes countless stories from the same alphabet. Constraint does not eliminate creativity. It makes creativity possible. Maybe existence works the same way. The universe provides the grammar. Life composes the sentences. As we follow this idea further, another realization begins to take shape. Human beings have always searched for certainty. We seek definitive answers because uncertainty feels uncomfortable. Yet some of the greatest discoveries in history emerged precisely because someone accepted uncertainty long enough to investigate it. Galileo questioned the heavens. Darwin questioned life. Einstein questioned space and time. Everett questioned the collapse of the wave function. Each began not with certainty, but with a willingness to ask an uncomfortable question. What if reality is stranger than we assume? That question remains unfinished. No experiment has yet revealed an infinite forest of branching worlds. No observation has eliminated the possibility either. The mystery survives, and perhaps that is fitting, because uncertainty does something certainty cannot. It keeps curiosity alive. It reminds us that the map of knowledge is still incomplete. Every generation inherits unanswered questions from the last. Some are solved. Others become even deeper. Perhaps the purpose of inquiry is not merely to eliminate mystery, but to refine it, to replace simple mysteries with more beautiful ones. If every choice already exists, then reality may be unimaginably abundant. If it does not, the universe remains astonishing enough without parallel lives. Either way, we arrive at the same destination. Existence is far stranger than ordinary intuition suggests. Yet amid all these grand ideas, quantum branches, mathematical architectures, and the geometry of time, we risk overlooking something quietly extraordinary. Regardless of how reality is ultimately structured, there is one phenomenon without which none of these questions could ever be asked. The simple fact that the universe has become aware of itself through you. Look around the room you are in. Notice the light, the shadows, the faint sounds that usually disappear beneath the noise of ordinary attention. Feel the weight of your body against the chair or the floor beneath your feet. Without realizing it, you have just performed something no telescope, particle accelerator, or supercomputer has ever achieved. You became aware of awareness itself. For a brief moment, the endless stream of plans, memories, and distractions paused. The observer noticed the act of observing. That simple shift may be one of the most extraordinary events in the known universe. Everything we have explored, quantum mechanics, branching realities, the geometry of space-time, consciousness, identity, ultimately converges here, not in an equation, not in a laboratory, but in experience. Because every scientific theory, no matter how elegant, is eventually encountered by a conscious mind. The universe may contain billions of galaxies. It may harbor countless planetary systems. It may even possess an architecture richer than anything we have imagined. Yet every one of those possibilities becomes meaningful only when something is capable of asking a question about them. Perhaps that is why the title of this journey has never really been about parallel worlds. What if every choice already exists? At first, the question appears to concern physics. By now, it has become something else. It has become a mirror, a way of examining how we understand ourselves. Throughout history, humanity has repeatedly discovered that reality is larger than intuition. The Earth was not the center of the cosmos. Time was not absolute. Matter was not solid. Empty space was not truly empty. Each discovery forced us to surrender another comforting certainty, and every surrender expanded our understanding. Maybe the greatest mistake is believing that mystery is evidence of failure. In science, mystery is often evidence of progress. We only recognize unanswered questions after we understand enough to ask them clearly. The frontier of knowledge has never been a wall. It has always been a horizon. Every time we reach it, another horizon appears beyond. The question of branching realities belongs to that horizon. It challenges our assumptions without demanding blind belief. The many worlds interpretation remains one of several serious attempts to understand quantum mechanics. It is mathematically consistent. It is intellectually provocative. It is also unconfirmed. No decisive experiment has established that parallel branches physically exist. Many physicists favor alternative interpretations. Others remain undecided. This uncertainty is not an inconvenience to be ignored. It is an essential part of intellectual honesty. The most profound ideas deserve both imagination and restraint. Wonder without evidence becomes fantasy. Evidence without wonder becomes sterile. Progress depends upon holding both together. Perhaps this balance teaches us something far beyond physics. Human beings often search for certainty because certainty feels safe. We want guarantees that our choices matter, guarantees that our lives possess meaning, guarantees that the future can be controlled. Yet the universe has never promised certainty. Instead, it offers something subtler: participation. Whether reality branches endlessly or unfolds along a single path, each conscious life still experiences only one unfolding sequence of moments. This conversation, this breath, this decision. The significance of those moments does not depend upon eliminating every alternative. It emerges from inhabiting one reality completely. Imagine once more the vast library of possible lives, every shelf filled, every story complete. Somewhere, perhaps, another version of you became an artist instead of an engineer. Another became a parent years earlier. Another never recovered from heartbreak. Another never encountered it at all. If such realities exist, they possess their own joys, their own griefs, their own questions. They are not waiting to rescue you, nor are they competing with you. They are simply different narratives within a universe whose full scale may forever exceed human perception. But this version of you, the one listening now, holds something none of those other versions can ever possess. This exact perspective, these exact memories, this unrepeatable continuity of experience. Identity is not merely a collection of possibilities. It is the lived thread connecting one moment to the next. Every conversation changes it. Every mistake reshapes it. Every act of kindness quietly extends it beyond yourself. Perhaps we have misunderstood the meaning of choice all along. A choice may not exist to eliminate every other future. It may exist to reveal who you become while walking one of them. That distinction changes everything. Instead of asking, "Did I choose the perfect path?" a different question emerges. How deeply will I inhabit the path I am already living? Perfection has always been an impossible standard. Presence is not. Whether you are speaking to someone you love, beginning a difficult conversation, creating something uncertain, forgiving, learning, or simply watching the evening sky darken above your home, you are participating in a sequence of events that no other consciousness can experience exactly as you do. Even if countless variations exist elsewhere, this experience remains singular from the inside. That is not a limitation. It is the condition that makes meaning possible. Some philosophers have argued that freedom consists not in possessing infinite options, but in responding wisely to the circumstances we encounter. Modern psychology often arrives at a similar conclusion. Well-being grows less from controlling every outcome than from engaging fully with the life actually unfolding before us. Curiously, this insight survives regardless of which interpretation of quantum mechanics ultimately proves correct. If there is only one universe, your choices matter because they shape the only future that exists. If there are countless branching universes, your choices matter because they shape the only future this consciousness will ever experience. Different cosmologies, the same human responsibility. Perhaps that convergence is the most surprising discovery of all. The question that began as an exploration of physics ends as an exploration of attention. Reality may indeed be far larger than perception. Time may possess dimensions we scarcely understand. Consciousness may remain one of nature's deepest mysteries, and somewhere within laboratories, observatories, and quiet offices around the world, scientists continue searching for answers that will reshape our understanding once again. The story is unfinished. It should remain unfinished, because every generation inherits mysteries that cannot yet be solved. Our task is not to close every question. It is to ask better ones, to remain curious without becoming careless, to remain skeptical without losing wonder, to recognize that uncertainty is not the opposite of knowledge. It is often the doorway through which knowledge first arrives. So, what if every choice already exists? The honest answer is that we do not yet know. The mathematics allows remarkable possibilities. The evidence continues to evolve. The debate remains alive. But perhaps the deeper value of the question lies elsewhere. It reminds us that reality is almost certainly richer than our instincts suggest. It invites humility before the unknown. It encourages us to treat every ordinary moment with greater attention. Because whether This is one path among infinitely many, or the only path that has ever existed. It is the one through which the universe is, at this very instant, becoming aware of itself. And perhaps that is the rarest choice of all. Not the one made by the cosmos, but the one made by consciousness every time it opens its eyes, embraces the mystery instead of fleeing from it, and decides that an unanswered question is not the end of understanding, but the beginning of wisdom.